And welcome to another episode of the Decatur Dish, where we talk about all things DeKalb County every Wednesday here on Atlanta News First Plus. I am Maria Moreau with Atlanta News First, joined by our wonderful media partners at Decatur Dish, founder and editor Dan Wisenhunt here with me. And Dan, happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday to you, Maria.
So we talk about all the things going on in DeKalb County, and this week there was some news that really impacts every single resident. So I want to jump right into this headline surrounding what was supposed to be the beginning of water rate increases. Were supposed to take effect yesterday and then were abruptly put on hold.
They were. The issue is about the creation of an affordability and accountability office when the water rate advocates in DeKalb County, this is how messed up our water system is. We have people who spend their private time advocating for the water. But as part of the support for that legislation, they were supposed to create an accountability office. The CEO was accused of dragging her feet on that. The CEO, Lorraine Cochran-Johnson, the people who supported the water rate increase withdrew their support. And as a result, I think she felt the pressure to go ahead and delay this a little bit until she could get that accountability office up and running. They're going to work with the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. They've helped the county distributing federal stimulus money, that sort of thing. So that's where that's at.
And I know that residents aren't eager to jump into paying more for their water bills, so not terrible news to receive that it's going to take a little longer for those increases.
I'm not sad about it.
Yeah, I was going to say. All right, it is July, and if you're thinking it's 2025, it's not a major election year, there's nothing I need to vote for, think again. We want to remind you July 15th is a very important day. Voting for the Public Service Commission primary is set to take place, and the PSC is a very important body in the state. It sets electric and gas rates, and they also regulate the state's utilities and infrastructure. So if you can vote in this election, please plan to do so.
If you live in the state of Georgia and you are a voter, you can vote in this election. It is a statewide election, even though there are districts, so that's one of the quirky things about it. As we will all recall, this election was a little snake bit. It had been delayed due to lawsuits challenging the setup of the PSC, and then after that, Daniel Blackman was on the ballot. At some point, either he or somebody on his campaign didn't read the residency requirements. He was disqualified from the ballot. Happened after the ballots were printed, after early voting had started. That race got kicked into a runoff between Keisha Waits and Peter Hubbard. Early voting on that is going to start July 7th. It's going to go through July 11th. You can find all of the great coverage that assistant editor Zoe Seiler did about this election at decaturishvotes.com. We'll have information about what you need to go vote, and we'll have the candidate Q&As if you still need a little help making up your mind between Keisha Waits and Peter Hubbard.
I really appreciate that you all laid everything out in one place so people have that resource to go to. It really is helpful and makes it all that much easier to vote and be educated on who your candidate, your desired candidate is. Dan, I want to ask you about this story that has been going on really for a couple weeks now. Get your opinion on this. This is regarding an anti-ICE protest that took place back in June and charges that were brought up against a local Hispanic journalist in DeKalb County. Now, Mario Guevara was arrested by DeKalb County police while covering a protest. He was charged with unlawful assembly and obstruction after reportedly stepping into the street while filming. Now, the DeKalb County Solicitor General said they dropped the charges because of a lack of clear criminal intent. But here's the thing, though. After he posted that bond in DeKalb, he was immediately taken into ICE custody over his immigration status. So there's a whole other can of worms in play now.
I have some nuanced hot takes about this issue. It will not shock you to hear that. By my reckoning, there were well over a dozen journalists at that protest. He happens to be the only one that was arrested, and then the charges get dropped. It's been an interesting exercise in government press releases, I guess, because the initially CEO Lorraine Cochran-Johnson defended their response and then said basically that everything was justified. People pushed back and said that's not exactly how it went down. She backpedaled a little bit, then she initiated a review. It will not shock you to hear that the police department's review of itself found that the police department did nothing wrong. I like to do reviews of myself as well, and I determined that I'm awesome at my job and need a raise, just a fun fact. But these self-reviews were initiated. The police department clearly thinks that it was in the right here. Lorraine Cochran Johnson said something to the effect of even journalists have to obey the law. And I've got good news. It turns out he was obeying the law. That's why the charges were dropped. I don't really know why that particular. We had multiple protests that day. That particular one in Embry Hills was the one that brought out the tear gas and the heavy-handedness with the police department and resulted in a journalist getting arrested. And I'd like to think that DeKalb County is a little more progressive county than most, that we know how to handle dissent and protest professionally. And I would imagine if the CEO were here, she would say that there were things that were happening that were not, that shouldn't have been happening. But I've reviewed a lot of the video, and frankly, Maria, I didn't see anything that warranted the response that protesters received in that case. And I hate it for this really brave. You got to be really brave, number one, to cover immigration issues, but also to do it in this day and age where even the slightest little wrinkle in your paperwork could get you deported. So this guy was taking huge risks. I'll just conclude by saying again, I find it interesting that of all the journalists that were there, the guy who has been doing the hardest hitting reporting on immigration is the one that happens to get arrested. And I think the full story has not come out about that yet. To talk about that with us today and a bunch of other things that are going on in county government, we have DeKalb County Commissioner Ted Terry. He'll be joining our show.
And we're going to talk to him right after this short break.
Joining us today is DeKalb County Commissioner Ted Terry. He's been a guest on the show before. Commissioner Terry, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me back, Dan.
Thank you for joining us. We want to get into it just real quick. Let's talk about the water rates. So this has been an ongoing saga here in DeKalb County. There was a lot of back and forth about what should the rate increase look like. They finally mustered enough political support for it to get it done. It was supposed to kick in on July 1, and it did not. Walk me through what happened.
Well, first off, as y'all have reported before, the can was kicked down the road many years for water and sewer infrastructure. So in February, obviously, Madam CEO, the Board of Commissioners all voted in support of the 10 by 10 rate increase to address what is about $4 billion in repairs that are needed to water and sewer. So the good news is that is still happening. It's still in our plans. We're still, seeking the bond to actually, pay for the first 3 years of this. And really what's happened in the last couple of weeks is making sure that all of the information, the educational materials, the discount program, the customer advocate, hopefully the amnesty program, the plumbing repair program, all of these things can be ready to be turned on as the rates are going up, because we know that some folks are vulnerable. We anticipate, anywhere up to 5 to 10% of our customer base might actually qualify for these programs, and what we don't want is for there to be a rate increase and then for there to be months and months to go by without those programs being in place.
The water bills thing is so mystifying to me. Not that that's a high bar to clear, but I do find it a little complicated. Am I remembering this correctly? Didn't the CEO at one point say like half of the accounts in DeKalb County have some kind of delinquency?
Yes, that was reported at a meeting a couple of months ago, and yes, the independent internal auditor has kind of opened it up a little bit further from a report that was actually maybe 2 years old. And so yes, what we estimate is that about 100,000 residential accounts are delinquent. However, there's like about 5% that actually have sort of caught up since that report was released. So maybe a little under 50%. And then if you look at all of the accounts, so commercial, sort of corporate educational users, the other non-residential categories, there's about another 100 million there that's also delinquent. So we're kind of parsing through that. It's not going to kill us when it comes to actually implementing the $4 billion investment over the next 10 years. However, the important thing is to, in my opinion, is to help folks get current with their bills. And then the ones who really have sort of these outstanding issues that honestly, Dan, go back a decade. I mean, I've heard from some residents who were told not to pay a bill for 3 years. And then when the moratorium ended a couple of years ago, all of a sudden they had like $3,000, $4,000 that weren't paid, and were told you got to pay it. And so what we're trying to parse out is folks who might be low income, disabled, senior citizens on a fixed income who probably can't fully pay the payment plans that were offered to them, to give them a chance to go to the customer advocate, work out some of those details. And then again, the amnesty program that I've introduced and that we're working on as well is designed to just acknowledge that state law actually says after 4 years, we can't legally collect some of this debt. And so we're going to have to probably write off or at least sort of acknowledge that debt's not going to be collected. But again, do it in a fair way. We do want folks who can't afford to pay it, who should be paying their bills, to do so.
When I hear that somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of accounts are delinquent, it raises so many questions for me, and it makes me wonder, is that on the ratepayers or is that on the county?
Well, the way I'm reading it is these bills go back to 2014, 2013. I mean, they're over a decade old, and some of them are newer, but a lot of them are from years ago. So I just think that all the things that had went on, the moratorium on shutoffs for years and years and years, delaying the rate increase, except that one in 2022, it just, in a way, was a failure of the system. And what I'm hoping what we're doing this year and in the next couple of years is really trying to wipe the state slate clean and make sure that we get as many folks current as possible. But yes, when you talk about almost half of the residential customer base owes some bill, I would argue that they're not all bad people. They're just a system that was confusing, and that sometimes folks just really didn't know what to do, and so they didn't do anything.
When CEO Michael Thurman took over, he came in with the New Day project and had a big, bold vision. And then he spent 8 years wrestling with watershed. Many people with noble and bold visions have tried to tackle this mess that is literally decades in the making. And I think my question more than anything is, has the county leadership ever considered just wiping the slate clean, as you say, doing a hard reboot of this thing, setting everything to zero and saying, we've done some things that we shouldn't have done or should have been on top of. let's start from zero and go forward and everybody's on the same page. Is that a thing? Is that a thing that can be done?
Absolutely. I think we're not the only jurisdiction. I think we can look to our colleagues over in the city of Atlanta. They also have been grappling with this themselves, and they also had implemented a program to try to get folks current on their bills, and even that approach wasn't 100%, right? So there's going to be some attrition in this whole process. But the good news is, with an amnesty program and a customer advocate, the goal is to have an independent kind of arbiter to go through all of these past bills, these past issues, things that really didn't get dealt with for a year. We just really pushed them to the side and said we'll deal with them later. And of course, what's that meant is that we've had over 236 million unpaid bills. So that's a lot of money. But yes, some of it is over 4 years old. State law is very clear about what utilities, public utilities, can do to collect this debt. And so the amnesty bill program that I introduced is designed to help us adjudicate these really old bills. And then the good news with the New Day program, which I will say was a tremendous success because the water meter situation has mostly been resolved. The last 2+ years of monthly reports at the billing advisory group has shown that, anywhere between 10 and 80 disputed bills out of 200,000, right, a month. And so for the most part, the water meter issues from the past have been dealt with. So hopefully that's good news for when we move forward, that there are less doubts about the validity of a bill, which really that's a lot of what you hear about is folks got a really large bill, Watershed said don't pay it or just pay a little bit and we'll figure it out one day. And so now we're at the day where we really got to figure it out and find a way to yes, wipe the slate clean and really move forward into the next 10 years with as much resources and capacity to fix these issues, because that's the underlying issue, Dan, is that a lot of these things just didn't get fixed. And just like the water main break this week, I mean, we're going to keep spending money to plug the holes, but we really got to fix the whole pipes.
There's so much more I could say about this, but we're going to stick a pin in it because we've got a few other things we want to talk about today.
Yep.
June 14th, we had some No King's Day protests here in Atlanta. There were millions of people. I've seen some estimate like 2 to 3% of the country was spending their Saturday holding signs out in the street. Mm-hmm. There was a protest in Embry Hills. It happened on the day of the No King's Day protests. It was not a No King's protest as such. That protest, unlike the other protests, went a little sideways. It had some tear gas deployed. A journalist was arrested, one journalist out of the dozens that were there. Mm-hmm. What happened? How did that thing go so off the rails?
Well, I've seen the videos from that particular protest. I've had individuals reach out to my office to share their experiences and their viewpoint. I think what I was looking for, and I think what ultimately is happening, is for there just to be a review of what happened. So I don't know everything. I wasn't there in person. I've only seen videos and firsthand, secondhand accounts. So what I'm really focused on is what the after action report looks like. I would argue generally that there should be levels of engagement. We should expect that in a protest movement or a protest moment, that there's always going to be sort of a place for civil disobedience, which I think has a long history in our country and should have some guidelines, but also some ability to tolerate. Civil disobedience, in a way, is saying I'm going to break the law, but to do so in a peaceful way. And so you could have a big argument about whether marching in the street for a few minutes is, going to end the world, or if it's a civil disobedience action and that it should be treated as such. And I would just hope that the level of escalation in the future, that tear gas and sort of the more militarized operations are sort of, all the other opportunities for de-escalation are exhausted before you get to that moment that is a much more aggressive response.
I did note that the CEO yesterday put out, I guess, some rules for protesting or rules for police response. I skimmed it. I'm going to go read it in a little while. What did you read it? What did you take from it?
Well, I mean, I'm always in favor of giving TMI, too much information, when it comes from government communicating with the public. And one thing I will point out that was really important in that toolkit is that state law has changed to where you can't wear a mask in public unless there's like a medical reason. And so this is actually a new state law. And we should assume that law enforcement, whether they're state patrol or even city, county police, will seek to enforce that state law. So that was one thing that I think maybe folks didn't realize and should know about. Now, the legality and constitutionality of that, and whether you can simply say that you're wearing a medical mask, right, for medical purposes, obviously that's like a whole other judicial context and whether that could be challenged. I will say that in my recollection of protest movements, because I have been in some before, I was part of the Iraq War protests back in 2003, that always having communication with law enforcement and protest groups is so important. So when we know that a protest is happening or a civil disobedience action is happening, if we communicate ahead of time about how those things are staged and done in a peaceful way, I think we actually can avoid a lot of the more aggressive tactics that happen. So I hope this is an opportunity for us to kind of one, inform the public, but also for there to be communication. And again, like I don't have a problem with civil disobedience. I think there's a place for that. There is a line though that could be crossed, and we don't want property damage. We don't want people's lives to be in danger. So it's always a delicate balance, but I fully support getting as much information out there as possible, because it's not like these protests are going to end. I mean, we might have another 3.5 years of them happening,
Oh boy.
on a regular basis.
It's always fun to figure out how to cover those things when you got 3 people in a newsroom. Last topic, something that you mentioned before we came on the show, data centers in DeKalb County. You got some real quick. You got some kind of legislation pending on this?
Yeah, so a lot of folks have been following the rise of data centers around Atlanta, Georgia, the entire country. They're huge energy hogs. They can be pretty disruptive if put in a residential context. So the county planning department is working on regulations to really just set the guidelines for data centers, because we actually have no provision in our code that defines a data center. So they're operating under outdated guidelines that basically govern storage units, which is sort of the closest you can get. And so what we're voting on next Tuesday is a moratorium, a 100-day moratorium on data center applications, so that the planning department staff can finish their review, finish their code revisions to bring before the community council, the planning commission, and ultimately the board of commissioners for consideration of adoption. And then hopefully from that point on, we could have kind of a more open, transparent, and regulated process if folks decide that they want to build data centers in DeKalb County.
Commissioner, we're going to follow that one for sure. Check out more coverage of that story on Decatur-ish.com. Commissioner Terry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. right here on Atlanta News First Plus. And that's the Decatur Dish Show. We tape every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. right here on Atlanta News First Plus. To check out episodes of this show, download the Atlanta News First app. To get all the latest news from DeKalb County, visit Decatur-ish.com. And to hear this show as a podcast, look for Decatur Dish wherever you stream your podcasts. See you next week.